Okay, guys, so this lecture is going to talk about how animals are put together, and organisms like us and different animals, how tissues work, how organs are put together, and a little bit of how animals are put together as a whole and how those parts interact with one another to form organisms. So, what we're going to be talking about essentially is anatomy and physiology. So, anatomy is the study of how organisms are put together. So, looking at how bones are put together, how they interact with one another, how tendons move, and things like that, how the bones interact with one another, how they connect, and things like that. Physiology, on the other hand, considers how the organism's body works. So it would be, why is the organism's body shaped the way it is? And like, why does he have these claws? What are the claws doing to allow this organism to do the things that it needs to do? How are the nasal passages going to allow the organism to smell? How are the eyes going to allow this little mole to see? They do have eyes, they're very small. You can kind of see it right there. So just kind of things like that. So that's what physiology is, and that's the difference between anatomy and physiology. But they do work together. So anatomy, for this mole, would be he has these really long toenails and these really wide front paws. That's the anatomy, the how he's put together. And the physiology is what he's going to do with that, the how it works. And they work like big giant shovels. So the anatomy fits the physiology. They're working like big giant shovels. And the bigger the shovel you have, the more sharp the shovel you have, the better you are at digging, which is exactly what this organism needs his claws to do. So his anatomy perfectly fits his physiology. So, I've mentioned this before in some of our earlier lectures throughout this series, but evolution kind of dictates how animals are going to be shaped and how they're going to be looking and their size and things like that. You can only get so big, muscles can only get so strong, bones can only get so strong before they get so heavy, things like that. The bigger you get, the thicker the skeleton bones that you need, which makes you heavier, so there's a trade-off. Water makes drag, so organisms are going to be shaped to get through the water with the least amount of drag, and there's really only one or two shapes that work really well to do that. So our boats all look the same kind of concept, and why airplanes pretty much all look the same, and birds kind of all look the same. Because there's only a couple of shapes that really work well to move through physical environments. So organisms tend to evolve very, very, very similar shapes when they live in similar environments. Simply because of the limits of the physical environment and physical things that they live in. So you can only get so big because you're going to get thicker, heavier skeletons. You're going to need more muscles in that case to carry those around, which means you're going to need more food. So there's a trade-off. And then when you're in the water, you have to either be very, very, very smooth to be able to swim through, like these guys, or you're going to have a lot of drag produced, which is going to slow you down, which is going to cause a lot of extra energy for you to consume to go through that water, whereas somebody who's significantly smoother would go through easier. So once again, remember this and keep this in mind, and this is kind of why animals all share the same, very similar building blocks. It's because we all kind of share the same similar environment kind of thing. So well, anyway, we talked about this concept in our very beginning of our lecture series of cellular organization, and that cell to tissue, tissues to organs, organ to organ systems kind of concept. So this is known as the organizational hierarchy in terms of cells. So cells, what is a cell? Cells are kind of the building block of all animal bodies, all organisms that we consider animals are made up of at least one cell. Cells can do pretty much everything that a cell needs to do. But in our circumstances, we're going to be talking about animals and organisms. So all animals are made up of more than one cell, and that's the definition of an animal. You have more than one cell. And we'll talk about that a little later on in this course. But anyway, so animals have more than one cell. So one cell can do everything that it needs to be a cell. But in this case, animals have more than one cell, which means they're going to have tissues. So more than one cell that's all the same. If you have a cell that secretes liver juices here, in this case, or stomach acid, in this case, stomach acid. One cell secretes stomach acid, the cell right next to it's going to secrete stomach acid, and the one right next to that. And all of the cells in that little area that secrete stomach acid are all going to be considered stomach cells, stomach acid secreting cells, which all of them taken together, since they're all the same, they're all in the same location, is going to create a tissue. a group of all the same cells that do the same thing. So a tissue would be all of the gastric secreting cells in one little area. Now, if you take those tissues, all of the same similar tissues in one area, and you put those together, you get an organ. So inside this entire stomach, all the way through that lines the entire thing, you're going to find very, very, very similar tissue that all secretes gastric juices all throughout the top and bottom of the stomach. None of the rest of the organs throughout the body are going to have tissue that's similar to this on the inside of the stomach, or else they would be considered a stomach, and that's what makes an organ an organ. And then what you do is you take all of the other organs that are physically connected to that one organ, so our colon, our large intestine, small intestine, digestive system, thing like that, and you're going to lump those in together because they all function together. You eat, it goes through your stomach, and then it has to go out through the digestive tract and then the excretion system. And then all that stuff together is going to be considered your organ system, the thing that allows the one organ to work. It would be like having a piston, and then maybe a piston head or a bunch of headers top of your engine, and then an entire engine, and then an entire car kind of thing. So when scientists talk about animals and organisms, they use terms that are going to be related to the way an organism is positioned. And this is kind of like saying top or bottom, front or back, stomach or a back, things like that. But sometimes that's different. Front or back, close, is it close to you, farther away from you? Is it near you, farther away from you? Things like that can get very difficult. Is your hand close to you or farther away from you? Well, it depends on what you're meaning. Is it close to you this way, or is it farther away from you up here? Well, that way it's farther away if you can't the arm, closer to your body. So this stuff gets confusing. So scientists have come up with actual ways to name where locations are in the body so they can refer to a particular position. So this is really useful for anatomy. You'll say the dorsally positioned bone or the anteriorly positioned muscle or things like that. And you don't have to go, well, is that the right-hand side or the left-hand side? Well, you automatically know because you've rolled out right or left. If you've ever done theater, stage right, stage left gets really confusing real quick. Same concept here. If the person's looking at you, it's their right. If they're not looking at you, it's their left. It gets very confusing. So just throwing out all of that stuff and using these easy terms right here eliminate all those problems. So you have dorsal, which is the top, dorsal fin, ventral, ventre, means stomach in French. Easy to remember that one. Anterior means your head. Your posterior means the other side. So those positions never change. You could put this animal on his back, and his back is still going to be his dorsal kind of thing. These positions don't change depending on the location of the animal. The front position of view is anterior. Once again, posterior kind of thing. Very easy to understand without having to go front, back, left, right, all of that stuff. And over here, someone's looking at you. The closer to their body, the closer towards the middle of their nose is the medial, and the farther away is the lateral. So they have a medial cut on their stomach, which means cut towards the middle. A lateral cut would be over here kind of thing. So proximal, meaning closer towards the waist. Distal, meaning farther away from the waist. So once again, very easy to have a proximal cut on their leg or a distal cut on their leg. You can understand which one that is. It's really easy to say, well, they have a close-up cut on their leg. Well, close-up doesn't mean anything. So you can give easier descriptions. 3/4 of the way distal down on their leg. Right there, you know exactly what it is kind of thing. So fairly easy to use these terms. And these are the official anatomy terms that are used to describe positions on the body. So let's talk about tissues for just a second. So tissues are all going to be cells, like I said earlier, that are all the same. They do pretty much the same thing. And they're all going to be held together in something called an extracellular matrix. So extra meaning outside the cells, and a matrix is just a big kind of blob, kind of like jello if you like, of water, carbohydrates, sugars, and fats and things, and protein fibers that are all going to be holding those cells in place. So this is kind of the rebar, if you like. If you know how rebar and concrete are used to build buildings, this is the rebar, the extracellular matrix that holds the concrete, the cells, in place. So there's 3 or 4 different types of tissues. There's 4. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And we're going to talk about each one of these in just a second. And they're pretty easy to understand as well as tell apart based on how they look and what they do. Now, epithelial tissue is going to be found anywhere on your body that has an external surface or that can be leading to the outside of your body, excuse me, is a better way to put that. And this may seem very easy to understand in the sense of you've got skin and stuff like that. But if you also think about the fact that if you open your mouth, there's a solid hole that runs from your mouth all the way down through your esophagus, down through your stomach, down through your intestines, and out the other end. It's literally a hole. You could run a thread if you wanted to all the way through there. It would not be hard to do. So that's external surface. All of that is technically open to the outside of the body. So everything along that way, your intestines, all that stuff, your stomach lining is all made up of intestinal or epithelial tissue. The inside of your nerves, or sorry, your veins, your blood vessels and stuff are opened up with are lined with epithelial tissues. Glands are lined with epithelial tissues. The inside of your nose, the inside of your tubes inside of your body, like drainage tubes for your ears. All of those things are open to the external surface of the body. And everything that's open to the external surface of the body could potentially come in contact with harmful bacteria, harmful mold, viruses, and things like that. So, if you're open to the outside of the body, you need to have epithelial tissue to keep yourself from getting sick, to protect the internal body. So epithelial tissues, like I mentioned, line the entire surface that's coming in contact with the outside of the body. Lots of different weird places. It's very tightly packed together and very, very, very condensed, very tightly packed. And this is going to, you can see some here, very tightly packed together, different types of epithelial tissues. And you can see how tightly packed they are. And this is to keep bacteria and mold and things from being able to penetrate through the skin layer into the body. Or penetrate into the blood vessel, into the muscle, and things like that. Every single epithelial tissue on the planet, since it is technically open to the outside world, has one surface called the free surface, you can see that up here, that is exposed to the outside. If it's on the inside of you in your stomach, technically there is air that could touch it, and that's the free surface. You always have one side that's not attached to another tissue that's open to the external environment. That's the free surface. The other side of that, on the other hand, is called the basement membrane. Now, the basement membrane is what's going to be used to anchor the skin to all of the extracellular matrix and stuff underneath it. So this is what's going to hold all of the cells to the jello and all the rebar underneath. So if you want to test this, you can take your hand and put your finger on top, or put your hand flat on the table. I'm going to take your other hand and put a couple of fingers flat on top and move your skin around. And you can watch your skin. You can pinch it and pull it up. You can move it around on top of your hand. And that's the epithelial tissue on top of that basement membrane moving around. Now, underneath that muscle tissue is not going to move around very much, but your skin is attached over the top of it with a membrane holding it to it. And that's so in case it gets scratched or moved or anything, your skin's slightly flexible, so it's not just going to rip off. And that's a little extra safety precaution built in, which is kind of cool. So epithelial tissue, no matter where it's at in your body, is always going to have an exposed surface, and then one that's anchored to that extracellular matrix underneath via the basement membrane. You can see here, the very obvious, this is squamous epithelial, simple squamous. Simple means one layer. You can see here, this is what lines your skin. This is out the external parts of your skin. You can see the external environment here, and then all this extra layers of skin and junk underneath. This is inside of a gland and things like that. Simple cuboidal, they're little squares, look like little pieces of loaves of bread on a shelf. Simple columnar, you can see here really tall little skinny cells. And then you can see the open environment there in the middle. In the open environment here, you can see those as well. So as I mentioned, simple consists of just one layer of cells, very thin, one single non-stacked layer of cells. You can see the nucleus inside of them, fairly easy. You can see them there, and things like that. And that's how you know if it's simple or stratified, where you have more than one layer. So some of the simple squamous cells that epithelial tissues, simple squamous, can be found lining the blood vessels and things like that, or the alveoli inside of your lungs, which is what's going to allow for oxygen exchange. Both of those are open to the external environment. Your blood, via your lungs, it does come in contact with oxygen and things from the external surface, and your lungs are easy to understand simply through the breathing process. Your simple cuboidal, this is going to be gland and lining of the kidney tubules. Organisms could technically swim up the urethra into the kidney, and this is what's going to keep that from happening, is also how they're exposed to the outside environment as well. And then our simple columnar is going to line the digestive tract, the bronchia of your lungs, and the uterine tubes. Uterines, you can see here a little bit. If you zoom in a little bit, you can see the little cilia on the surface of these cells. And these cells are going to brush the egg along the uterus down through the fallopian tubes and as well. The lining of the lungs and lining of the digestive tract, the little cilia are going to move food, move mucus particles and dust and things along through the passages, ways that they happen to be in, to keep the area clean. They want to make sure that the eggs can move down the fallopian tubes. Your lungs need to be clean of dust and nastiness, things like that. And you also need to get food particles and junk out of the way. So that's what that cilia does. It's going to move stuff out of the way. Stratified, on the other hand, has multiple skin layers, multiple epithelial tissue layers stacked on top of that basement membrane. So you can see here our actual skin, so stratified up at the top, that very simple squamous cell up at the top, but underneath it you have multiple layers of epithelial tissue all stacked on top of one another. You can see it all through here, just bunches of different layers of nuclei, all stratified through here, different layers in different directions and things like that. This is the external surface of your skin, muscle and stuff down here. You can see the basement membrane right there. And this is going to be very thick, very dry, very hard, to keep bacteria out, to keep viruses and mold and things from being able to get through to the soft, squishy underbelly of your skin. So you can see here, stratified cuboidal. This is going to be lining your sweat glands, ovaries, and things like that. And then you can see the very last one down, is pseudostratified. And this is going to be lining other tubes and things throughout your body. You can see the cilia on here as well. A connective tissue, on the other hand, is going to be used to hold things in place and tie organs together, and tie organs to skin, skin to muscle, and things like that. Tie bone to bone and bones to muscle and stuff like that. So instead of being this is a very interesting concept. So there's lots of different types of connective tissues, and they do different things depending on how they look. And you can kind of understand once we get a little bit into this what they look like and how they're useful for. So loose connective tissue, you can see it here. It's going to consist of elastin, which are these little tiny blue filaments. They're very strong, very flexible, very stretchy, and collagen, a little more thick, a little more slightly rigid, the big ones here. You can see those as well. Now, loose connective tissue is going to be found as if you did the thing earlier where you moved your skin around underneath your palm. The loose connective tissue is what's going to be holding the basement membrane to the muscle underneath. It's going to be holding it in place. So the loose connective tissue is what allows your skin to float around on top of your muscles, and it doesn't just fall off. It's going to be holding the muscle underneath to the skin on top. It's also going to hold your organs together and hold them in place inside your body. Your organs need to make sure that they stay in the same place that they are so that they work. They don't just flop around and squish around inside of your body. So being able to tie them to the surface, inside the surface of the body wall, the body cavity, and tie them to one another and keep them in the place that they are. And if you do happen to take an impact or shake up or jar or something like that, it keeps them from shaking around. And it kind of gives them a little shock protector to have like a bungee cord, I guess, instead of just them slamming up against one another and slamming up against the body wall. The loose connective tissue kind of acts as a shock absorber a little bit to keep everything in place. Dense connective tissue, on the other hand, is what's going to be used to connect bones to muscles and bones to bones. So if you grab your leg right behind your ankle, you can feel your Achilles tendon. It's a very, very, very hard um, thick, dense, elastic fiber all struck together inside it. You can see that here. It's very organized, very looks kind of like a little thing of ramen noodles or maybe freshly brushed hair. Um, and it's going to be very tightly wound together, very tightly packed when compared to our loose connective up here. And the reason for that is it's going to have to do a lot of work. That's what's going to be pulling your bones. It's what's going to be doing work for muscles. It's going to make your muscles move. I'm going to make your bones move. You need to be able to pull lots of weight with those tendons and those ligaments and things. They need to be very strong to take shock absorbing from running and things like that, to be able to bear lots of weight pushing down on them. So if you had a tendon made out of this loose connective tissue, it would probably snap. So dense connective tissue allows you to have a lot more force behind the movements that you do, because you have a lot more fibers to condense and to keep you from popping your tendons apart. And then adipose tissue, these are fat cells. And this is going to be found underneath the basement layer of your skin, in between your muscles, around the heart, and around the joints inside your body. Now, these things are going to be used for multiple different purposes. Now, you can see over here, these are the fat cells themselves, and they're empty at the current moment. Fat goes inside of the little fat cells, and if the body needs the energy, it will suck the fat out of the fat cells and use it for its own purposes. If not, the fat just stays inside of there. Now, fat is useful in some places and not useful in others. It's pretty much everywhere underneath your skin, around your muscles, and things like that, around your organs. And it's there in small amounts to provide insulation so that your organs don't get too cold and things like that. Or also, if they need a little bit of excess energy, they can start burning off the fat around them and things like that. Well, anyway, if you have too much fat around your organs and things, it's going to cause an impact on the way that they function. It's going to cause them to have more work to pump your heart, more work to digest food. You're going to have to carry around excess weight, which causes more energy consumption and things like that. So more fat than you need is potentially detrimental to your health. And then less fat, on the other hand, can cause your body to have problems regulating heat, regulating internal functions and stuff like that. So neither one of them are good. Too much or too little in the way of adipose tissue is not good. Now, the other type of connective tissue, you may not necessarily think of these as connective tissues. They're going to be blood, cartilage, and bone. And this cartilage is easy, but blood and bone are kind of interesting on this one. So blood, you're probably familiar with red cells, white cells, and platelets. Red blood cells are going to carry oxygen around. White blood cells are going to be your immune system, and the platelets are going to be responsible for clotting your blood together. When you get cut, all of that stuff combined with the plasma, the liquid portion of your blood, are going to be considered connective tissues as well. They're going to be flowing inside blood vessels and arteries and things inside your body. And they're going to be carrying gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and stuff in and out of the body from place to place. Hormones, waste products, and nutrients around to different organs and things inside of your body. So very, very, very useful type of tissue. Cartilage, on the other hand, is cells in a very, very, very thick matrix of collagen fibers. Collagen, if you remember I mentioned earlier, it's very strong. It doesn't bend a whole lot. It's bendy. It is flexible, but it's very strong. So it pops back into shape. So your ears are made of cartilage. Your nose is made of cartilage. The end of your bones are made of cartilage. Your respiratory tract, your trachea is made of cartilage and things. It's strong and rigid, but also bendy. And the reason for this is the places that are made out of cartilage tend to be very dangerous in the sense of an evolutionary perspective if you're running through the woods. Your nose sticks out in front of your body. You hit your nose on a tree. It's made out of hard bone. It's going to break. It could kill you. You could get an infection. You could die very easily. Now, if your ears, and same thing with your ears, they poke out on the side of your head, very easy to get your ears broken. Now, if you're running along in the woods and your ears just bend out of the way and flex and move around, same with your nose, not so much of a big deal. It doesn't really matter. They're not going to cause you any problems. So they just bend out of the way. Still serve the same purpose as having a rigid ear, but they bend and they're significantly lighter than having a bone ear as well. Joints and things that rub against one another, every end of your bone is going to be considered coated in cartilage as well. So when things rub against one another, they don't wear out. Bone on bone rubbing once up against one another is very painful, very difficult process for your body to deal with. It rubs off the bone, it chips the bone down, wears it down. But having little cartilage caps on the top of ends of your bone, it's loosen or lessen that impact. So your bones don't wear and rub as hard as they would without that cartilage. And now as you age, that cartilage does wear down, causing things like arthritis and stuff as the cartilage goes away. And then your respiratory tract, your trachea, if you've ever squished on your throat or something, it does move around. It's soft and squishy. The same thing, you might potentially have something fall on your throat. And if you had a hard, rigid windpipe, it would break your hard, rigid windpipe and you would die very easily. Whereas having a soft, potentially a slightly squishy respiratory tract allows you to survive things like that. So then you've got bone, which is going to just provide support for your body and attachment points for muscles. If you've ever had a winch on your car, you have to tie the truck to something before you can use the winch, or else the truck's just going to get pulled into whatever you're trying to winch the thing that's stuck out of. The bone serves as the tree that you tie your truck to. If you didn't have the bone for the muscles to attach to and they just pulled against the other bone, nothing would happen. The muscle would just flop forward and nothing would work. So bones provide an attachment point for muscles, which can then be used to pull tendons and things. So bones provide support, rigid support, and they also provide attachment points for tendons and muscles and things, so they can have something to pull against. Now you have muscle tissue, our other type of connective tissue. Nervous is our last. And there's 3 different types of muscle tissue: skeletal tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. Now the first thing that you really need to understand about the different types of muscle tissue is that they come in 2 different forms. Let me see if I can get that back to it. They're not here, but anyway, so I'll go over it now. Voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary muscles are muscles that you have control of when you choose to move them. If you want to pick up your arm, or move your fingers around, or move your eyeballs, you most certainly can do so. Those are called voluntary muscles. You have the ability to control how those muscles move and when they move. And involuntary muscle, on the other hand, are things that you cannot control, like the beating of your heart. You can't stop your heart from beating. You can't speed it up. You can't slow it down. It's going to beat when you're asleep, even though when you're asleep you can't run, or you're not running because you're not thinking about it, but your heart's going to still beat, even though that you're not awake. Peristalsis, the movement of food through your intestines, digestion, all the stuff inside of your body that keeps you running is going to be an involuntary muscle reaction. Things like when you look into the light and your pupils get really small, pupil dilation, is going to be an involuntary muscle. You don't have control over that. So things that just happen that you can't control are going to be involuntary muscles, whereas muscles that you can control are going to be voluntary muscles. So skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles, this is it right here. It looks kind of like a stack of quarters or a little stack of nickels. This is called striated muscle. You can see the little striations, the lines in between it. Now how these work, these are going to be these are voluntary muscles. You have control over these. These are going to be attached to a bone at some point, and then another bone over here. So it's going to be used to move bones, to do big power movements like running and things like that. So your skeletal muscles, what's going to happen is all these little things are going to condense on top of one another to condense, kind of squish the skeletal muscle. I'll post a video on how this works. And then kind of like a rubber band condensed up and then released all the pressure at once to do big motions and things like that. So the more striations, the more condensed the muscle can get, the more energy it can store inside of it that can then all be released at once. And that's a skeletal muscle. These are voluntary. You have control over them. They are attached to bones and used to do movement inside of the body. Now, on the other hand, cardiac muscles and smooth muscles are involuntary muscles. You do not have control over these. Cardiac muscles are going to, obviously, as the name implies, make up the chambers of your heart, makes up the heart muscle. Very strong muscle. It is striated. It's slightly branched, very strong muscle though. And the reason that it's so strong is because your heart has to do hundreds of thousands of repetitive motions every single day, and it needs to be able to sustain doing that without breaking down. So, a very strong muscle to be able to pump all of that blood throughout your body. And then you have just pure smooth muscle, which lacks any striation of any kind. And these are going to also be voluntary or involuntary. You can't control these things like the digestive tract, your peristalsis, moving food throughout your body, arteries dilating and widening in your body, your pupils dilating and stuff like that. You have no control over that. Your body does that without you thinking about it because it has to, or else you would have some serious problems staring at a bright light. Food not moving through your body, or blood not being able to pump around your body as it needs to. So that's the difference between voluntary and involuntary muscles, as well as the different types of muscles found throughout the body. And then we have nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is what's going to be used to transmit electrical signals, pain signals, stimuluses from the outside of the organism to the organism's brain. So essentially, you're probably familiar with this diagram. You've seen it before. We have the dendrites up here and the synaptic gaps down here. So let's pretend this is the outside. An organism touches something with their skin that's very hot. The skin is interpreting that as a pain. The pain is instantly going to be transferred to the dendrites right here as a chemical signal. That chemical electrical signal will then travel down the nerve through the Schwann cells down here, through the axon, out through the axon, down through the axon terminal. The chemical signal will then be jumping the synaptic gap here from the axis terminals here into the dendrites of the other nerve cell, which will then start that process over, down, 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 until eventually the nerve cell gets to another one, jumps the signals, then continues it on until eventually that reaches the brain. And then eventually the brain will interpret whatever that chemical signal is as pain or pleasure or heat or cold or whatever it happens to be, and then send back an appropriate response. Hey, that's hot. Let's get that hand off of that stove. So the brain will send an appropriate signal, appropriate chemical, which will then go the other way, down the dendrites, through the axons, down, 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 and telling the hand to remove itself from the hot stove. All of this happens within a millisecond of one another. Very, very, very fast transmission, very efficient. It's not instant, but it might as well be. So we've already talked a little bit about tissues, sorry. So let's go ahead and talk about organs and organ systems. So tissues are going to be groups of similar cells that all do the same function. And then when we take a bunch of similar tissues and stick them all together, we get organs. And then when we take a bunch of organs that all work together with one another, we get our organ system. So organ systems and organs are interconnected, and organ systems are interconnected with one another in how they make the body function. So our nervous system and our endocrine system. Our nervous system, you can read down here, detects, interprets, and responds to stimuli from the outside of the body. And we talked about the nervous tissue, how that transmits signals around your nervous system. Is also going to work in response to your endocrine system. Your endocrine system is going to produce hormones and things, going to produce testosterone, estrogen, but it's also going to work in concert with your nervous system to help regulate things like stress, the fight or flight response, because when your body detects problems, oh my gosh, there's something scary, I need to get ready to fight or run away, your nervous system is going to tell your endocrine system, hey, get ready, you need to turn on some extra hormones to get us ready for that fight or flight response. So they talk to one another to getting the body prepared for fight or flight, running away, managing stress. If the nervous system is put underneath stress, that will tell the endocrine system to release stress hormones and things like that. They talk together, and if neither of them are functioning well, or if you're overstressed or all the time, it can cause detrimental problems in your organ systems because of having too much stress hormone and things like that. Your skeletal system and your muscular system work close in hand. These are very easy to understand. Your skeletal system provides attachment points for muscles and tendons and stuff like that. I've talked about this one as well. And it's also going to be how your body moves. If you were just a big giant blob of soft, squishy muscle, you would not be able to stand upright. You wouldn't be able to push anything. Your muscle would just squish out of the way. You wouldn't be able to do stuff. So your skeleton, the bones inside, provide hard, rigid points for your body to have stuff attached to, as well as for you to be able to stand upright and not just be a big giant squishy ball. Your muscular system, on the other hand, is going to be what moves the skeletal system. It's going to be the engine that powers the bulldozer, while the crane, while the crane is going to be the skeleton, the thing that's moving the stuff around. The muscles also provide warmth and insulation for the body as well. So both of those things, they work side by side to one another and play off of one another. Your digestive system, your circulatory system, and your respiratory system all work together to help you get energy for your body to power ATP synthesis. Digestive system is going to break down foods that you eat into their smaller, pretty much what things that they're made out of, smaller sugars. Those smaller sugars are then going to be carried throughout the circulatory system in the blood and things like that. The food, the useful nutrients, are going to be carried throughout the circulatory system in the blood to organs and different cells and things like that throughout the body, as well as carrying oxygen around to help power ATP synthesis for the digestive system to make that energy in the first place. And then your respiratory system is how you're going to bring that oxygen in to carry around inside of your body, as well as get rid of the carbon dioxide that's produced via ATP synthesis over here by the digestive system that made the energy from the sugar that you brought in. That was carried around through the circulatory system, which carried the oxygen and took the carbon dioxide back, which was then gotten rid of through the respiratory system. So all of these things work together to make sure that you function as an organism and don't die from things not working as they should. You have your urinary system, your integumentary system, and your lymphatic system. These guys also work together to protect your body from outside harm. Your urinary system is going to work by keeping the internal environment stable, by getting rid of toxins and things that you might eat. It's also going to get rid of waste products that build up in your body via metabolism and process of getting rid of food, or breaking down food, I should say. It's also going to get rid of organisms that may go try to enter the body through the urethra and things like that, through the urinary tract. Your integumentary system, I've covered this one as well. Integumentary just means outer covering. This is your skin. It's going to be dry. It's going to be covered in salt. Going to be very thick. We talked about the different types of tissues that cover your skin, and that's going to help keep bacteria and mold and things out. You don't want them on the soft, squishy muscle underneath, and it's also going to help conserve water from being escaped to the soft, squishy muscles. If you got a nice, thick, hard layer over the top, you're not going to lose a lot of moisture through evaporation. Whereas your urinary system, on the other hand, is also going to help conserve water by reabsorbing things through the process of forming urine. So both of these help preserve water loss. And then your lymphatic system and your immune system are also going to help protect the body from things like bacteria and mold. If the integumentary system has a problem or it's breached by, say, a cut or something like that, they all work together to help protect the body. And then you've got the reproductive systems, male and female reproductive systems that work together to help ensure that the next generation is produced and that organism continues its species on. So, organ systems, like I mentioned earlier, they all work together. They all work together to help ensure homeostasis within inside of an organism. This all makes sense. If you detect a buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood, you're going to need more oxygen brought in, so you're going to have to breathe in more, which is going to have to cause the body to produce more oxygen, to produce more energy to help the respiration rate increase, while breathing more is going to cause the heart to pump faster, cause more blood to go through the circulatory system, which is going to cause more excess water to be produced, which is going to cause the urinary system to have to work harder, which is going to be causing more waste products to be built up, which you'll have to get gotten rid of through the digestive system, which will also have you to eat more food because you're making more energy, and so on and so forth. So all of these things work together to help promote homeostasis inside of the body. If you have more oxygen that you need, your body slows down, which means you need less food, which means you're producing less waste and things like that. They all work together to help ensure that you are a healthy, functioning organism as you should be. Negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops. These are fairly easy. This is how your body talks to one another. I think I've covered these in another lecture. So positive feedback loops. An example of an actual positive feedback loop in an organism for humans would be breastfeeding or childbirth. I'll talk about that one in just a second. I don't have that one on here. But cutting, bleeding, and things like that. You cut yourself. One or two red blood cells, platelets are going to go, help, we have a problem. They're going to release a chemical that attracts more platelets to their area, which more platelets are recruited, which release more chemicals to attract more and more platelets, which release more and more chemicals to attract more and more platelets, and so on and so forth until a bunch of platelets show up and clog the area. So that's positive feedback. It amplifies the reaction. So one little cut led to a couple of platelets, led to 20 platelets, led to 40 platelets, led to 1,000,000 platelets. That's positive feedback. It builds something up. Now, our example up here, breastfeeding. When that little baby latches on and starts to suckle, it stimulates the release of oxytocin, which lactin, which stimulates the female's body to release more milk. The more that the baby suckles, the harder he suckles, the more lactam is produced, which increases the milk production in females. So it's positive, or the milk releasing of the female. So it's a positive feedback system. It builds up on top of itself. Now, you can see here lots of different ways that your body helps to regulate homeostasis. So homeostasis and dealing with internal body temperatures is called thermoregulation. Endotherms, ectotherms, you're probably familiar with this concept as warm-blooded and cold-blooded. Endotherms are organisms that can regulate their internal body temperature like us via the process of shivering or sweating and things like that. And then you have your ectotherms, which are the other way of saying cold-blooded. Warm-blooded and cold-blooded are not real terms. It's just kind of the easy way of saying this. And an ectotherm, ecto meaning outside, these guys regulate their body temperatures based on the outside environment. Now, they can regulate their body temperature a little bit. They can raise it 1 or 2 degrees, but if it's 50 degrees outside, they're going to be at the most 53. If it's 50 degrees outside, we're going to be 98.6 regardless for the most part, kind of thing. So that's really how this works. So ectotherms, if they want to warm up, they're going to have to go into the sun to get warmer. If they need to get cool, they'll have to go into the shade to cool down. Whereas us, if we want to cool down, we have to start sweating. Where if we want to warm up, we have to start shivering. Our body regulates our temperature for itself. They do not. Endotherms, we can survive large fluctuations of temperature in our environment. We can put coats on and things like that. You can also go live in the desert. It's super hot out there. As long as you have enough water, you will survive. You can also survive in the Arctic as long as you have enough food. Kind of interesting how that works. Your body and enough, if you can find shelter, you can keep yourself alive. And if you put a snake in the Arctic, he would freeze to death very quickly. And in the desert, they would get too hot. Endothermy, maintaining your own internal temperature, very energetically expensive. You have to eat a lot of food. It takes a lot of food, a lot of energy to make the heat that's required to keep us at 98.6. But it is a trade-off for that. You do get being able to have a stable environment at all point in times. So sometimes it's not very useful to be wasting energy. And organisms have evolved ways to get around wasting energy when they don't need to. Sometimes it's going to be too cold outside. It's not really worth wasting a bunch of energy to shiver constantly when there's not enough food and things like that. It's too dark to look around. Things like little hummingbirds down here, they fly so fast, their heart rate's so quick. It takes so much energy for them to fly around. Then in the winter, there's not enough flowers to provide them enough energy, so it's not very beneficial to waste energy looking for food. So these different types of organisms have evolved ways to lower their metabolic rates to slow down how much energy they need. And 2 ways to do this are torpor and hibernation. Now, you're probably familiar with hibernation. Organisms like bears and stuff, they essentially eat a whole bunch of food and then they go to sleep for 3 or 4 months when it's going to be really cold outside and there's no food for them to eat. It would be very energetically silly and wasteful to try to survive outside of your giant hole in the winter. You would waste so much energy trying to maintain your internal body temperature by shivering, and there's not enough food to maintain that energy loss that you're more than likely going to die. So essentially, these guys go to sleep and they lower their heart rate and their breathing rate, their metabolic rate, to pretty much nothing. So they're not making a lot of energy while they're also not using a lot of energy. So it allows them to survive periods of really scarce food, really cold temperatures, and things like that, hibernation. Torpor, on the other hand, is a very, very quick version of hibernation. Where things like hummingbirds, where if it's not, if they spend a lot of time flying, they're exhausted, they can go into a little state called torpor, where it's essentially a very quick energy-saving device where they kind of get a very quick, it's like a cat nap for these guys, where they die for the most part, same as hibernation, and they lower their metabolic rate to pretty much nothing, and they kind of can recoup a lot of their energy that way. A very interesting little quick way to do that. And hummingbirds are very prone to torpor because they have so much high level of energy consumption, and they actually sleep upside down when they go into torpor, which is really pretty cool. And then some organisms have found out how to manipulate their environment and their metabolic rate using the environment, which is pretty cool. So these are Japanese snow macaques. They live in Japan, obviously. And you can see here it's very cold and snowy here. It would be very wasteful to sit out here in the snow and shiver all day long. And these guys have figured out that if they hop in the warm hot spring here, they don't have to shiver. They don't have to spend as much energy to shiver. So they can sit in these warm hot springs, which keep them warm. These are volcanic hot springs, by the way. There's a volcanic geothermal heat. So this is what keeps this warm. So the monkeys sit in the hot springs all day long and keep themselves nice and warm and not having to waste energy eating and shivering and things like that. Now, unfortunately, these guys do have a hierarchy. But certain monkeys are only allowed to sit in the ponds and other monkeys are not. And they're very strict about their hierarchy. So this is not totally fair in this society, and not all the monkeys get to enjoy the hot springs. It's just some of them. It just depends on the family, quote unquote, or a little clan of monkeys that you happen to have been born into. So this is pretty much all I got for you guys over how animals are put together, how they work, and how sometimes they can manipulate their metabolic rates, and how sometimes they can use the environment to do that as well. So if you guys have any questions over this, or if you want me to elaborate on anything else, please feel free to send me an email. Other than that, have a good rest of the day.